Is your spouse shouting all the time? And are you sick of it? What are you supposed to do about that? Hi, and welcome back to Ask Dr. Saira, the show where I answer your questions about spiritual development, personal growth, and mental health. Today's question comes to us from Sultana. It's a very common question, I'll say, one I hear all the time in the groups that I run and in therapy one-on-one. Very common question. So here's the question. How do I get my spouse to change? How do I get my spouse to change? He needs to stop yelling. It's been going on for years and I can't take it anymore now that we are retired and he is always home. That's Sultana's question. How do I get my spouse to change? He needs to stop yelling. It's been going on for years and I can't take it anymore now that we're retired and he's always home. Okay, so this is a multiple part question. So let's break it up. Okay, so the first piece of it is, how do I get my spouse to change? The second part of it is, he needs to stop yelling. And the third part of it is, I can't take it anymore since we've both retired and now we're at home together. Okay, so let's start with the first one. How do I get my spouse to change? So, if you've worked with me for any period of time, or you've ever been to a therapist, or you've ever watched any inspirational, video, or you've read any kind of self-help book, the first lesson in this journey is you cannot change anyone. You cannot change anyone. Sometimes you can't even change yourself, right? You cannot change anyone. So that question, how do I change them, whoever the them is, you can't. You can't change anyone outside of you. You can only change your responses to them. You can't change them. You can only change how you see them, the stories you tell about them in your mind, and how you respond to them. So if you want to change your spouse, what you could change is the way you see your spouse, perhaps. What you could change, perhaps, is the amount of time you spend with that person, right? So you cannot change. And I know you probably don't like that answer, right? I'm sure you were saying, like, okay, finally, someone's going to finally tell me how to get my spouse to stop yelling. That's part two, and we'll get to that. But the first part is about change. You cannot make anybody change. And even as parents, we think we can make our kids change. We can make our kids be obedient, right? We can make them follow rules out of fear, or out of feeling like, okay, they have to respect you and obey you, and so they do what they're told. But you're not changing hearts, right? You're not changing minds and hearts. You're just changing behavior. And maybe that's okay with you, but for me, I know I want to change minds and hearts. I don't want to just see a behavioral change. I want my children to actually want to do the things that I'm getting them to try to do, right? So, but we can't. It has to come from them. We can influence sometimes, we can offer, we can guide, but we cannot change anybody else. And like I said, sometimes it's hard to change ourselves. How the heck are we going to change someone else when we can't even change ourselves? So that's the first part of your question, is, how do I change my spouse? You can't. Second part of the question is, he needs to stop yelling. And so what that tells me is that, well, and you say in your question, Sultana, that he's been yelling for years, right? This is just how he shows up in the world. He yells, and it's been going on for a long time, and you can't take it anymore, right? So this is something that I often ask my when we do our couples work, we ask our couples to think about is, why now? Why is this bothering you now, right? If this behavior has been going on for years and years and years, why suddenly now it's bugging you, right? What's shifted in you, or the environment, the circumstance, that suddenly the yelling is bugging you? And she mentioned retirement, that we're both at home all the time, right? And so that's a change. So where you would have had your space, they would have had their space, you're kind of doing your own thing, you come together, sometimes he yells and you deal with it. Now it's like always together, always yelling, or the sometimes is more and more frequent, and you're just like, oh man, I'm so tired of this. So it could be that that was the change, is that the retirement happened and now you're together all the time. It could be, for others who are listening, it could be something that's changed inside of you, right? So maybe you're learning now how to set boundaries, or maybe you're working in more self-care into your routine, or maybe you're surrounding yourself with other people with a growth mindset. And so as you're changing, you're noticing these behaviors that in the past you would have been fine with or you would have tolerated, but now feel too much for you. That's another thing, and it often happens on this journey. And I would encourage you to explore that. Is that what might be happening? That you're changing, and because you're changing, the behaviors that have always been there are starting to now get under your skin. So how do I stop the yelling? If somebody's yelling, that often means they're not feeling heard. That's the basic reason we yell, is because we feel like we're not being heard, and so our voice goes up. We feel like we're not being heard when it seems like the other person doesn't get us or understand us or want to understand or get us, right? So usually somebody doesn't just start yelling, right? Usually there's these little pokes that happen throughout the day or throughout the week, these tiny little jabs that keep happening, and then suddenly the person yells, right? That's usually how yelling happens. And it might not be that person that's poking them, right? So it might not be you, Sultana, who's poking him. Maybe he's getting poked with other things that are going on in his life, other people in his life, other situations. Maybe, he has some health condition now that he's not happy about, and that little things keep reminding him that he's aging, right? It could be so many things. And so now that response comes on to whoever's like the closest person around, right? So the poking can be happening from somewhere else, but then you're getting the results of it. He needs to stop yelling. I would consider, what does the yelling do to you? So when he yells, what do you make that mean about yourself, right? Do you make that mean, oh, he's disrespecting me? Do you make that mean he doesn't care about me? Do you make that mean he's a mean person, or he's unkind person? What's the story that you're telling yourself when he yells? Because that story and how you tell that story will determine whether this is going to get better or not. Because there's so many people who are stuck in this gridlock in relationships, right? Because one person's always done it this way and the other person's always done it this way, and we're just stuck here. And there's so much complaint about that. But as one person starts, disentangling themselves from the gridlock, you can see it a little bit more clearly, like, oh, I see what's going on here. So if he's yelling, I get curious about why that might be. Right? Maybe not just because he's a yeller, but why that might be. Usually, those types of yelling behaviors, there's usually anger involved, right? And under anger is often fear. And so you might get curious, knowing him the way I do for all of these years until retirement, what might he be afraid of? Right? It's a different way of looking at the problem. Rather than seeing him as the problem, you see the yelling as the problem, right? And many couples get this wrong, where it's me and it's them and we're having a fight, rather than it's me and it's them, and together we're looking out at the problem that's in front of us as a team. So that might be that's the second part of the question. The third part of the question is, this has been going on forever, and now that we're retired and home all the time, I can't take it anymore. So that kind of links back to my earlier part about what's changed. And when people retire, lots changes, right? Because we live in a society and a culture that values work and contribution. And when you're no longer working for money, or you're no longer generating an income, or no longer raising a family and doing those kinds of things that it takes to raise a family, suddenly it's like, well, what's my contribution? How do I fit? Where do I fit into this societal structure, right? And so retirement is hard on people, for many people. People who are really engaged in their life, retirement can be tough. Think about the concept of retirement, right? So the concept of retirement and Social Security and all of that, it actually was birthed in Nazi Germany. And so the idea was that people can pay in to this pool of money, and then when they turn 65, they can have some of that money back. There's a social security plan, right, developed by that regime. And what was interesting is that the average lifespan was under 60. So most people are not going to hit that 65 and never take out the money, and so then the regime has money to pull from to do whatever they were doing during the war. So that's kind of the one of the ways that this whole idea of social security or old age pension, or that putting in a pot and bringing it out again, that's the thinking, is that, well, they're not going to hit that age anyway, so, right? And a lot of people were dying in war, so they're putting in. So what that tells us is that 65 at that time was chosen as a number because it was an old age. 65 was old age. Now, people in their 60s, I don't think of them as old, right? Very vibrant, very much engaged in the world, very much like, you know, still very much moving our societies forward. And so we have this old story about what old age looks like, and it doesn't fit. So when you retire, you might have like 30 more years to live, not 2, but 30, right? What are you going to do at that time? And so as you're retiring, as you're moving to retirement, that's something to consider for yourself, is what am I going to do with this phase of my life, right? I kind of had the first phase, we're kind of learning and growing and going to school and figuring out our career. The second phase, we're either working in the world or working in the home, trying to grow our families, grow our businesses. And then there's the third phase, where now it's about sitting back and looking at some of those deeper questions that are there in life, being a mentor and a guide for others. So are you smoothly and gracefully transitioning into your retirement? Something to ask yourself. Because a lot of people, rather than dealing with that, they just fight with each other. Right? Rather than asking themselves those big, profound questions of what do the next X amount of years of my life look like, they just fight with each other. And what's the fun in that? You still have time. You still have time to make a contribution and to be engaged in the world and to mentor people and to share your wisdom, but you're too busy fighting with your spouse, right? So that's the third piece, is to really look at your priorities during retirement. And for those who are not retired but kind of are leading up to that place, make a plan for it, right? Just like when we were in elementary school, we started making a plan for what we would do after high school. Some people were going to go into the job market. Some people were going to go to university. Some people were going to join the family business, whatever it might have been. But we had a plan, right? As children, we had a plan about what's our future going to look like. Somehow when we become adults, we stop having a plan, and that's problematic, right? Because then you're just caught in that nitty-gritty day-to-day, and there's nothing to look forward to as a couple. So how do you get your spouse to stop yelling? How do you get them to change? How do you get them to stop yelling? It's getting on your nerves because you're around each other all the time. It's a fair question. And my answer is, you cannot change anyone. Yelling is often a symptom of something else going on underneath. And retirement, really starting to redefine retirement and what that means to you. So those are my thoughts on that question, Sultana. Hopefully it was helpful to you and maybe others who are watching. If you do have a question for me, a burning question about any of these topics of personal growth, please send it to me. You can join us at dragonflywellnesscenter.ca. There's lots to do with it as you join our community. So we have courses, we have programs, we have counselors and coaches and energy workers and all kinds of people here that we've gathered up to support you in your journey. So join us. It would be great to see you there. Talk to you soon.